Let's first welcome Dr. Faiez Kirsten, who joins me in studio. Assalamu alaikum, shukran for being here.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, Zainab.
How are you this morning?
Alhamdulillah, yourself?
I'm very well, alhamdulillah. Now, Dr. Faiez, before we start off, just some background around the history of pharmaceutical drugs and some of the dangers that we may not know about. A bit later in the program, I will be playing just a clip from someone that I think it's important for listeners to just get an idea of what exactly we are saying. But just from your side, what exactly is the history of pharmaceutical drugs?
Terrible. I think before we start with the history, maybe I must just quote a guy by the name of Aldous Huxley, who wrote a book called Brave New World. I don't know if you read that book. It's a story about the future. He wrote it in the mid part of last century, I think. And he describes a tyrannical, totalitarian world that we're going to be living in the future. That was 600 years hence. But I think he was a few hundred years wrong, actually, because we're actually almost there. He said medical science has made such tremendous progress, there's hardly a healthy human left. Which is absolutely true. Now, if you look at the history of the pharmaceutical industry, as I said before, J.D. Rockefeller Sr. is actually the father of the pharmaceutical industry. He actually started the petroleum industry in the States with Standard Oil. And then they found this opportunity to take over the medical education system in the United States. And they basically then introduced the pharmaceutical paradigm into the education system in medicine. They took over other systems, also the legal system and so forth. But they actually captured, the medical education, the universities, the medical schools, and they funded those ones that were eager and happy to implement the pharmaceutical paradigm, research in pharmaceutical drugs, etc., in their medical schools. And those who didn't want to, didn't receive any funding, and they actually had to close down. The pharmaceutical industry basically came from the petrochemical industry, and a lot of your pharmaceutical drugs are actually products of those petrochemical products that were produced by the petrochemical industry. Together, they took over the American Medical Association, and then the FDA was set up in 1913, the same year that the Rockefeller Foundation was basically formed. And then from that point onwards, actually, cancer exploded, polio exploded, all these chronic diseases actually became worse because of what these guys actually started to do once they took over the medical education system. And obviously we can bring in IG Farben, which is a massive German conglomerate which they partnered with, and then obviously after World War II, IG Farben actually broke up. But many pharmaceutical companies actually came out of that also. There's lots to talk about, the history, but I think more importantly, we should talk about the dangers and the deadliness of pharmaceutical drugs. And, everything I say today, this morning, is not my opinion. These are facts. I mean, many books have been written on the subject. Many papers have been written. And I can just list maybe a few of those books so that the listeners can actually understand what we're actually dealing with. We're actually dealing with a crime against humanity on a massive scale. It's so massive, it boggles the mind, actually. But the fact that most people are completely unaware of it is again a power testimony to the power of the media, which these guys also own. Most of it. So let me list just a couple of books, if you don't mind, Zainab.
Okay,
can I do that? The first book is called Anatomy of an Epidemic. Now look at the subtitles of these books, and that tells you a lot. The one says Magic Bullets, Psychiatric Drugs, and the Astonishing Rise of Mental Illness in America. And that was written by a guy called Robert Whittaker. Then there's a book called Side Effects, Death, Confessions of a Pharma Insider by John Regan Verapin. He was a big guy, big director in one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies, and then he was fired, and he basically started speaking out against the pharmaceutical industry. This is the book that he wrote, and this is the title that I just mentioned, but you can go onto YouTube and you'll see some of his videos there. He says he was a criminal. Okay? So he has no problem exposing what actually happens in the pharmaceutical industry. Another book is called Confessions of an RX Drug Pusher, meaning a prescription drug pusher, and her name is Gwen Olson. Her niece actually died from these neurotropic drugs, antipsychotic drugs. She actually committed suicide, and then she basically also started speaking out against the pharmaceutical industry. Another book called Deadly Medicines and Organized Crime, How Big Pharma Has Corrupted Healthcare, and that's by Professor Peter Gotcha, and I think that's the clip you're going to be playing by him. Another book is called The Truth About Drug Companies, how they deceive us and what to do about it, by Marsha Engel. She's a physician, and she was the editor for two decades, 20 years of the New England Journal of Medicine. She also wrote another book called The Illusion of Psychiatry. And then there's a book by Ben Goldacre, a physician, scientist, researcher, called a book called Bad Pharma, How Drug Companies Mislead Doctors and Harm Patients. And finally, the last book is a book called Death by Medicine by Gary Null, PhD. We've got to realize that every day millions of people across the world, are dying slowly. And many of them being tortured to death, really. Not by their sickness, okay, but by the very medicine they have been prescribed, to treat that sickness. So this is what we're dealing with, deception on a massive scale. And I just want to qualify this. I've become anti-drug, obviously, as you can hear, anti-pharmaceutical drug over the years. Obviously, as a doctor, I've prescribed many drugs in the dark ages, when I lived in the dark ages, okay. But there is a place for pharmaceutical drugs, okay, especially in trauma and emergency. When a person is in severe pain and so forth, there's nothing else you can do but give them these drugs, and they do work. The benefit there is actually outweighs the risk. And the only reason why I'm saying is I concede that we have to use these drugs in those situations because we haven't done enough research and put enough funding into researching how we can treat emergencies and trauma situations in a more natural way. So there's nothing we can really do about that. But in chronic illness, my advice is stay away from these things if you can. Yeah. Anyway.
Okay, so maybe we should take a listen to this and we further unpack it after, inshallah. Do stay tuned.
My name is Peter Goetje. I'm a director of the Nordic Cochrane Center in Copenhagen and professor of research design and analysis at the University of Copenhagen. 2 years ago, I found out that our prescription drugs are the third leading cause of death after heart disease and cancer. Our drugs kill around 200,000 people in America every year, and half of these people die while they do what their doctors told them. So they die because of the side effects. The other half die because of errors. And it's often the doctors that make the errors because any drug may come with 20, 30 or 40 warnings, contraindications, precautions, and so on. No doctor in the world knows about all this. So they give patients drugs that they should not have given them, that interact dangerously with other drugs or food items or so on. And then the patients die. That's the other half. So the other thing I found out 2 years ago was that much of what the drug industry does fulfills the criteria for organized crime in US law. And they behave in many ways like the mafia does. They corrupt everyone they can corrupt. They have bought every type of person, even including ministers of health in some countries. So there is a huge amount of corruption. In my country, for example, Denmark, we are regarded as having very little corruption, but yet we have thousands of doctors on industry payroll, although we are just 20,000 doctors. So this is an effective kind of corruption. The drug industry buys the professors first, then chiefs of department, then other chief physicians and so on. They don't buy junior doctors. So when several thousands are on industry payroll, it's really, really bad. And that's why I wrote my book, Deadly Medicines and Organized Crime, How Big Pharma Has Corrupted Healthcare. I hope to convince patients not to take so many drugs because so many die from the drugs they take. In my country, people take so many drugs that every single citizen can be in treatment with 1.5 drugs from they are born till they die. This is incredible. And drugs are not that helpful. And they kill very many of us. We know that. That's why drugs are the third major killer after heart disease and cancer. So what we need in the coming years is to take far fewer drugs than what we do currently. If we did that and we were careful, then we could live longer and live better lives. Because drugs have many side effects, and patients often don't realize that when they become worse, that it could be a side effect of the drug, which they continue taking because that's what their doctors tell them. So when I was a specialist in internal medicine, what I very often did was that I stopped a lot of drugs, particularly in elderly people, and it's quite revealing to see a bedridden elderly person come into your ward, and when you stop the drugs, I mean, that person becomes many years younger. And many of these drugs affect the brain, and old people tolerate that very, very badly. They fall, and when they break a hip, a quarter of them die. And for example, antidepressant drugs are used in more than 10% of our elderly. And they seem to kill 3% of them every year. I mean, if 100 old people take an antidepressant for 1 year, 3% of them will die because they fall and break their hip. This is a huge death rate. So a lot of other drugs than antidepressants also make people fall and kill them. And they may affect your cognition, your memory, and all these things. And then they interact in ways that we know almost nothing about. Very many elderly, they take more than 5 drugs a day. And we actually don't know how these drugs interact with each other. What we do know is that all drugs have many effects in the body, and some of them interact also in their metabolism, so that you can get a too high concentration of a drug if you take other drugs simultaneously. So we make a lot of harms that we don't even recognize. I have a pretty colorful collection of things people have called me during all these years. And sometimes journalists have asked me, why do you always look up controversy? And my reply is, I don't. Controversy looks me up, because it's not popular to tell the truth in healthcare. You will get a lot of enemies, because a lot of people make money on false premises, doctors and industry alike. And our drug regulators and our politicians, they are on board on this wagon. So very few people are independent of money in healthcare. And of course, I have attacked a lot of holy cows during my career, and people have screamed loudly. In a French journal, I was called a statistical masturbist, because I showed with statistics that mammography screening didn't work and things like that. And I was even accused of scientific misconduct by the Association of the Danish Pharmaceutical Industry, which was completely ludicrous. It was harassment from beginning to end. They came with vague arguments that we cannot recognize the conclusions in your study. And they could have come up with numbers and said, these numbers are wrong. They didn't do anything. It was only harassment. It lasted 18 months, I think, the whole thing. And then when we were acquitted, I made sure that this nasty behavior was described in the British Medical Journal. So after that, they haven't come so much after me, the Danish drug industry. And when my book about organized crime came out, they just lied about it, as they always do, that my examples were old, they went back 90 years and so on. But, you know, where I demonstrate that what the 10 biggest companies do is organized crime, these examples, they were from within the last 10 to 15 years. That's not old examples. And the crimes have increased, because when crime pays, you will have more crime. That's how capitalism works.
100.4 FM stereo, it's Radio 786, and that Peter Gotcha there speaking about some of the history and really what pharmaceutical drugs is doing and has been doing, and also just giving you some advice, things that you won't necessarily hear just anywhere. But Dr. Faiez, just your take on what he just said.
Well, it's all true. I mean, he is a director of the Cochrane, Center in Denmark, and they do extensive research, in-depth research, and their findings are irrefutable. But not only him. I mean, as I said, many people have investigated the pharmaceutical industry, and they've uncovered unbelievable crime that actually happens in this industry. But it's not only in this industry, it's the banking industry, it's the agricultural industry, the food industry. These, I don't even know what word to use to describe them. They're basically engaging in crimes against humanity. They're killing millions of people every year. I mean, like we said, 9 million people die from cancer every year. A lot of them actually from the treatment of cancer, for example. And, the cancer treatments, chemotherapy is a pharmaceutical drug, okay? It kills a lot of people, like we just said. So how do they get away with it? I think that's the question we should all be asking ourselves. How is it possible for criminals to engage in such crime, racketeering, and fraud and everything else, and get away with it?
Because
that is the question we need to ask ourselves.
We buy into it.
It's all about the globalist agenda. That's the first thing. We must understand everything that happens in this world. If you don't understand the globalist agenda, you understand really, really little, maybe even nothing. I'm sorry to say. That's not a nice thing to say. I'm sorry about that. But you have to understand the globalist agenda. And we have to understand something called mind capture. We all talk about state capture, okay? The state has been captured. Many states have been captured long ago, okay? And I can prove to you that it has been captured, okay? Because governments don't really formulate policy. If governments had the well-being of their people at heart, they'd be able to formulate policy which would actually protect their people. But you go into any food retail store, you don't find food there anymore. You find poison. How did it end up on the shelves? How is it possible that our doctors are prescribing poisons every day to their patients, which are killing them? And not me that's saying this, Professor Gotcha himself and others. But it's legal to do that. If governments were in power and they had the power to look after and protect their people, this wouldn't be happening, which should tell you that, in fact, governments are not in power. They are basically there for entertainment, perhaps, okay? But there are powers above them. I call it epipolitics, forces above the politicians that actually control the politicians. Like epigenetics, you have factors and forces above the genes. Governments don't control money supply and economies of countries. Governments don't control policy related to drugs and food, etc., like I just said. They have to follow policy that's dictated down to them from forces above them. This is epipolitics. So this is how basically we've come to this situation, and the people's minds have been captured, and therefore they're doing nothing about it. And they're dying. I've seen colleagues, neighbors, friends all die from these poisons. And and before they died, didn't believe what I was saying. Why? Because of mind capture. This is a serious, serious issue that we're dealing with. And as a person looking at this and not being listened to most of the time, it's really concerning, actually. Yeah.
But now, for people who are on prescription drugs every single day, that feel and believe that they are not able to go without it, let's say they're listening to this, what do they do now?
If you're on chronic medication, there's certain chronic meds you can stop immediately. There are safer, natural alternatives, okay? You can stop certain chronic meds immediately and nothing will happen. You'll actually be better off. There's others that you can't stop immediately and you have to be weaned off of them. A lot of them are related to mental disorders, the antipsychotics and so forth, antidepressants, benzodiazepines, even the proton pump inhibitors, you can't just stop them. But you can be weaned off. It's a process, okay? So I'm not saying if you have on chronic meds for several months or years that you must just stop them like today. That's a dangerous thing to do. You have to be under the care of somebody who knows what they're doing, when you are being weaned off of these drugs, basically. Yeah.
But now, then what really is the purpose of when you go to a pharmacist and you actually need to get better and he gives you prescription drugs? Why are they giving it to people?
Mind capture. It's indoctrination. I mean, your education system is, your universities, your schooling system is not education institutions, they're indoctrination institutions. A lot of what I learned, I don't know how much, what percentage of it, but when I was at the business school, a lot of the stuff they taught me, they didn't make any sense to me. First of all, the first thing that didn't make any sense was the idea of a corporation, a legal fiction that has rights oftentimes above that of a human being. And it doesn't exist. It's a fiction which has rights above human beings. I mean, that is so nonsensical that only a person with no brain cells, will be able to actually believe that. But a lot of people actually believe that, okay? And corporations rule the world, and corporations don't exist. Now, I mean, that alone tells you if your mind is not captured, then what is, why do you believe that stuff? Understand how the the statutory system works, but it's a satanic system. The statutory system is an anti-human anti-freedom system. Okay, so we must understand that. So people need to interrogate their own beliefs. Why am I believing this stuff, and why am I being part of this satanic system that's actually harming people? But oftentimes their own families are being harmed, and even doctors themselves are being harmed by the very medications they're pushing every day. It's a ridiculous, unbelievable situation that we find ourselves in now.
It is Community Pulse on Radio 786 this morning. We take a look at the pharmaceutical industry with Dr. Faiez. Kirsten, let's go to the lines. We have a caller. Assalamu alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum, Shainabeen.
Walaikum
I'm just salam to the doctor.
Walaikum
Very,
salam.
very refreshing discussion. And it's also very pertinent to our society today. Doctor, you speak about legal mafia. The authorities, in fact, the governments are actually legal mafia. It's all about social control, doctor. The whole industry, all the industries is about social control. The religious industry, the pharmaceutical industry, everything is how to make money. And it's unfortunate that, the masses, psychology was a subject that only came out now in the late 1900s. There was never such a subject as psychology. So that subject only came, in the late 1900s, I think, it came out that it became a subject. And the psychological warfare that's been put on the masses is by the few. And by the few is those that is persistent on capitalism, and it's unfortunate. The pharmaceutical company, there was doctors that were threatened in America, that were almost assassinated in America because they went against the American the medical fraternity. And if you look at the money making scheme, it's happening all over, doctor. It's happening in the religion. It's happening all over. It's happening about money. That's why the authorities, for me, it is like psychologically they have played with our minds in such a way that what they are promoting, that is what life is all about. And what are they promoting? What life is all about is promiscuity, permissiveness. All these issues are being promoted because the masses are vulnerable. People are meant to err. And this is unfortunate. And I hope our people, the masses, I would say, can realize that they are being played. The same with the political situation here in our country. We are being played, against, with the color issue, with the issue of racism. But the actual fight that we're supposed to take on is economics, but we don't. And this is how they're playing us. So we're going to the the history of Steve Biko. That's fine. That is the history. It's powerful history. But the narrative should be on the economics, and they don't do that. The same with the pharmaceutical company. Very good friend of mine, his brother is still paying off the hospital that killed him with the chemo. It was the chemo that kills people. In fact, you sign a document. You must sign a document before they chemo you. Then you must sign that it's not curable. That is what they did with one of my friends. And this is our people are so vulnerable because the doctor, he went to university, he went to go and educate himself, so he knows better than the ordinary person. And this is unfortunate, doctor. And doctor, I'm glad that you are bringing up these issues because you are a doctor. People will listen to you. Shukran, doctor. They'll listen to you.
Walaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Dr. Faiez.
Shukran for that, brother. Yep, the brother's right on all fronts there, actually. The thing, you can just see that John D. Rockefeller Sr., throughout his life, he refused to take his own medicines. He actually used natural, holistic medicines, basically. That in itself, if you know the history and the mindset of John D. Rockefeller, then you will understand that we should all be avoiding pharmaceutical drugs, synthetic drugs. John D. Rockefeller's other philosophy was that competition is a sin. So in other words, he had to own everything. The petrochemical industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and then with his other Illuminati families, they own the banking industry, and then they control the whole world, really. The economic, situation is very, very important. As I said, these are indoctrination camps, universities and so forth. The economics I studied made no sense to me on many levels. And many years later, Professor Werner, he's a really enlightened economist, actually proved that what I was thinking years ago about economics is that the assumptions that mainstream economics, equilibrium economics is based on are completely, they don't apply to this planet, okay? Those assumptions don't apply to this planet, so there is no equilibrium economics. And he's quite right, But our whole economic system is based on the assumption that the economy equilibrates, demand equals supply and prices, come to that level actually with price and where price equals demand equals supply and so forth. So the whole thing is basically a scam. It's basically misinformation, deception. It's really deception. And who involves themselves in deception? Who deceives human beings? Those forces that are non-human, those that are made of smokeless fire. Okay.
Let's go to the lines. We have a caller. It's Dr. Faiez Kirsten in studio with me this morning, looking at the pharmaceutical industry. You live on the Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh. Shukran to the doctor there for his honesty and for bringing us, or bringing to us the truth that how they are actually destroying us. But what is the problem that I think we must go back to the Quran when Allah Ta'ala says, وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَلْ لَهُ مَخْرَجًا وَيَرْزُقَهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبُ وَمَن يَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ. That if we are God conscious and God fearing, then Allah Ta'ala will make a way out for us, for our health when we are sick, and Allah Ta'ala will sustain us with the necessary cure. And Allah Ta'ala, and if we put our trust in Allah, we must trust Allah. We mustn't trust the doctors. There we can hear now what this doctor says. We don't trust him, but the pharmaceutical or the creation of Allah. We should not put our trust in them, but we must put our trust in Allah Ta'ala, and Allah Ta'ala will see to us, and فَهُوَ حَسْبُهُ, and Allah Ta'ala is sufficient for us. Doctor, really, wallahi, what you are saying, it affected me because I'm also on chronic medication now. And when I started to drink it, I felt something is not right with me. And then I went to for a second opinion, and I told this doctor, tell me, man, this stuff, does it damage my health? He says, well, you got a choice. Either you take the medication that is prescribed to you, or you suffer another stroke. And that put a little fear in me. And then I decided one night, and then I went to sleep, and then I had a dream, and then this sifat of Allah Ta'ala came up. And I went to different shuyukh, and I asked them, what is the meaning of this? And the words that came to my, during my sleep, it was, Ya Qadirun, Ya Qadir. And in the morning I woke up, I was so glad that I had that on my tongue, and I went to go and do research, and what it says there, wallahi, it says that Allah Ta'ala is most powerful. So whatever these people are trying, this Rockefellers and Buckle-fellas, if we say that is what our Nabi taught us, if we say Bismillahi wa ala barakatillahi, then Allah has got, like we heard now, the sifat of Allah, Allah Ta'ala has got the power to take all that poison out of that tablet, so that tablet can be a cure for you, but only with a niyat that is not the cure. Allah is our cure, and that we're only taking as a substitute because it was prescribed to us. But we must go back to Allah, inshallah. Shukran, doctor, for your advice, and I appreciate it very much.
Shukran wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullah. Dr. Faiez.
Afwan, brother, for those beautiful words. What more can I add to that? I just want to bring up this issue of something called polytheism versus monotheism. Okay, I think this is based on what the brother said there. Most of us, whether we're Jew, Christian, or Muslim, are actually polytheists, although we claim to be monotheists. Okay, monotheists meaning we believe in the one God, but we have many other gods besides, the one God that we say we believe in. We have the God of government, and that's the religion of statism. We have the God of corporations, that's the religion of corporatism. We have the God of sports, which is sportism. So we have all these different gods, and many times these other gods take precedence over the God that we say we really believe in, the one God. And what the brother said there is so very true, and I really can't add to that. But one must just be aware of the fact that oftentimes we're not the monotheists that we claim to be. We're actually polytheists, yeah.
We are due for a break, and inshallah after the break we will continue. Remember that our lines open 021-699-1786. Also make use of the WhatsApp line on 0786 1011 12. We're talking about the pharmaceutical industry, the history, and just how deadly it deadly is. Now we have a few WhatsApp messages that I will be tackling after the break, inshallah. But remember 021-699-1786. After the break we continue. It is 9:45 on Radio 786. If you have just joined us, a very warm welcome. You are listening to Community Pulse this morning. It is Thursday. In studio, I have Dr. Faiez, Kirsten joining me, and we're talking about the history of pharmaceutical industry and also how deadly it is. And we heard earlier from Professor Peter Gotcha, who just gave us some insight into the pharmaceutical industry. And we're also receiving some many WhatsApp messages via 0786 1011 12. Assalamu alaikum. It's such really a pleasure to listen to Dr. Faiez. He is always covering really refreshing topics, alhamdulillah. And then assalamu alaikum, the honorable doctor and all the listeners. Beautiful subject, mashallah. The Quran refers to herbs as in chapter 55 verse 6, and the herbs and the trees do homage, Dr. Zain. And then assalamu alaikum, I am a thyroid I'm on a thyroid and high blood pressure and cholesterol tablets. Should I continue?
I won't be able to give advice, to a patient. It's not under my care. But the person is welcome to contact me, and we can, if she wants to chat about it or he wants to chat about it. Yeah.
And then someone requesting for the names of the books that was mentioned at the very start of the program. Maybe just very quickly, if we can just go through some of it, inshallah.
Yeah, there's quite a few books that I mentioned. The first one is by Robert Whittaker's Anatomy of an Epidemic. The subtitle is Magic Bullets, Psychiatric Drugs, and the Astonishing Rise of Mental Illness in America. He discovered that the longer people are on these psychiatric drugs, the more likely it is that they'll develop a chronic illness. So drugs, psychiatric drugs, and in fact many other drugs actually cause illness, okay, and then relieve it. And then there's Bad Pharma, by Ben Goldacre, the subtitle is How Drug Companies Mislead Doctors and Harm Patients. And then Marsha Angle wrote a book called The Truth About Drug Companies, How They Deceive Us and What to Do About It. And then Professor Peter Gotcha's book, which is Deadly Medicines and Organized Crime, How Big Pharma has captured, and corrupted healthcare, or how Big Pharma has corrupted healthcare, rather. And then by Gwen Olson, a book called Confessions of a Prescription Drug Pusher. It's actually RX Drug Pusher, which means prescription drug pusher. And then a book, by John Verrippen, who is just titled Side Effects, Death, Confessions of a Pharma Insider. And maybe I should just mention some of the things that John Verrippen actually said about the pharmaceutical industry, because that'll really be an eye-opener for a lot of people. Should I say that? Should I mention?
Okay, before you do, let's first go to the lines. We do have a caller live. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to you and the Honorable Doctor and all your listeners. In fact, I would like to add to the discussion. The sad thing is the Muslims are so large in number. There are so many countries. There's so much wealth. The world can drown in the wealth. Yet, unfortunately, they cannot produce any professors, any doctors, any people of status that can contribute to the development of humanity and where they can come up with solutions to the problems. When this Mao Zedong said that religion is the opium of the masses, he was right. Because unfortunately, the clergymen, they use religion as an opium to keep people retarded and backwards. Before, 60, 70 years back, they used to tell the people, now you mustn't go to school, you mustn't send your daughters to school to become doctors and lawyers and professors and things like that. No, just send them to madrasa, they must read Quran, read Surah Tabarak and Yasin and all of it, and give everything in Allah's name. That's why the Muslim world is kept so behind and retarded. Now, when we read the Quran and study it as it should be studied, and we understand Surah Al-Kahf, when Allah Ta'ala prophesied about Ya'juj and Ma'juj, Dajjal is not mentioned in the Quran, but the Muhammad ﷺ linked it up with Ya'juj and Ma'juj, describing Dajjal. Now, these are all systems that are actually based on evil to retard the development of man to be independent. Now, if we understand the significance of Ya'juj and Ma'juj, they are there to control the economy of the world. They are there to control the minds of the world for men to become like robots. And the clergy, unfortunately, they've even worsened this by adding fuel to the fire, by keeping people not to think, to understand the Quran through reason and thinking. Now, we should try to break our shackles, to be free, to think, to reason, to become professors, to become educated people, so we can contribute to the development of humanity and mankind. That is the only weapon we as Muslims have. If we're not going to wake up, unfortunately, we're going to talk about this for another 1,000 years to come. Jazakumullah.
Shukran wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Before you comment on that, we have one message. In fact, I think it's I'm glad this person messaged us. It says, Shukran for a very good program. I work in the pharmacy industry, and it is interesting. It is a very interesting industry. My personal life, I use homeopathy medication for myself and my family, and what the doctors are talking about is absolutely true. When a patient with the prescription, it's amazing what some of the doctors prescribe to some patients, and it's sad to see they prescribe medication and more medication to avoid the other medication with different side effects. Sometimes I see prescriptions with 10 or more items on for very young people, and it saddens me to think that this is what some doctors have become.
No, that's very true. But I think also we must put our money where our mouths is, rather. And if we are working in an industry that's actually harming humanity, then maybe we should leave and do something else. I think that's really the way we're going to change the world, is not to continue being part of the problem, but to actually take a firm stance and become part of the solution. So if you're working in, for a company that's making GMOs, for example, but you go home and you eat organic food, that is almost, maybe it's hypocritical actually, so we should all basically be getting out of these situations that's causing us to perpetuate the problem. But coming back to what the brother says, beautiful words, I don't know what more to add. Definitely Ya'juj and Ma'juj, Gog and Magog, causing massive corruption, facade across the entire planet, okay? And there's Dajjal, the Antichrist. But I want to come to this issue of jinn. I think these people, the globalists basically running this control agenda, basically, two things: they're influenced by these jinn, these demons as the Christians call them, or the archons as the Gnostics or the New Agers call them, but we call them jinn. They're influenced by them, and they also perhaps possessed by them, okay? And in that way they're able to conduct magic on human beings, because the banking system is magic, the healthcare system is magic, the pharmaceutical industry is magic. It's all magic that's playing out and tricking people's minds. If you understand how these systems work, you'll see it's pure magic. Now, I wanted to address an issue that the brother mentioned, the brother that phoned in today, but he also mentioned this thing a few programs back, that Allah lives within us. And a lot of people actually believe that. And I don't believe that based on common sense, but also what the Quran says, okay? Common sense is if God lives in you, that means God goes with you everywhere, including the toilet, okay? Secondly, if God lives in everybody, lives in the psychopath also. And that means when the psychopath is torturing an innocent person, a young child perhaps, is God there? What is God doing at that point in time with the psychopath, being in the psychopath? But in Surah Ikhlas, in the last verse, it says, and there is nothing likened unto God. In other words, God can be compared to nothing. Nothing compares to God. Nothing that you can imagine is God. You don't have the ability to imagine what God is. We know God has certain attributes, okay, 99 names and so forth. But physically, metaphysically, we don't have the ability to imagine what God is like. So you can't compare God to anything. Now we know that jinn actually enter human beings, okay? We know that. People get demonically possessed. If you say God lives within you, you're saying God is like a jinn, okay? Which is completely not what that verse says, okay? So I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay.
But the beautiful words that the brother actually, mentioned earlier on is really true. It's actually a tragedy that the Islamic world, the Muslim world is so backward because we see our religion as a religion. The word religion actually means to bind, to keep back, okay? Islam is not a religion. It's a way of life. And so we must get out of this thing that, we have as a religion. It's not a religion. It's a way of life. It encompasses your whole life and especially your thinking. And if you've basically abdicated critical thinking, then it's not part of your way of life. This is not your way of life. So you're part of the religion, but not part of the way of life. Yeah.
Now we have more WhatsApp messages via 0786 10 11 12. The caller is 200% correct. He should read Maulana Imran Hussein's books and watch some of his YouTube DVDs. And then, your Sheikh on Table Talk insists emphatically the man can't be possessed. Okay, and then we have Assalamu alaikum. I'm a diabetic and I am on insulin and metformin. Have very low B12 and iron levels. Doctor said it's the metformin taken B12 injections and iron tablets. The levels did not improve much. What can you advise?
Just say that again, Zaina.
I am a diabetic. I take insulin and metformin. Also have very low B12 and iron levels. The doctor said it's the metformin and taking of B12 injections and iron tablets, and therefore the levels did not improve much. But what will you advise?
I know metformin will decrease your B12 levels, okay? So, but I don't really understand the question, actually. I mean, she's diabetic, she's on insulin and metformin. She's
very
on
low B12.
B12, but she's on B12 injections.
Yes.
But the B12 is still low.
Yes.
It could be the metformin that keeps dropping it, possibly.
Okay.
Yeah.
But just in a final note, we have about we have a minute and a half left just to conclude, Dr. Faiez, and I think that this is a conversation we need to carry over for next week, inshallah, and also maybe touch on what to do with those expired medications that we have stuck in our.
Throw them away. That's a simple solution, I think, because it's dangerous to take expired medication because the drug companies have obviously covered themselves. They say this is the expiry date, and meaning that you shouldn't be using it after the expiry date. And if you do use it and something happens to you, you're harmed or killed, you got no recourse. If your family, if you're dead or if you're still alive, you have no legal recourse because they told you that's the expiry date. Don't take it after that.
So what do we leave with the listeners this morning?
Oh, there's so many things I wanted to tell the listeners, but I don't know if I must actually mention. I think I'm just going to mention one thing that Peter Rost, he was actually the ex-vice president of marketing of Pfizer. He was fired, after complaining, about the illegal marketing of human growth hormone as an anti-aging drug. And this is what he said. He said, it is scary how many similarities there are between this industry and the mob. The mob makes obscene amounts of money, as does this industry. The side effects of organized crime, are killing and deaths, and the side effects are the same in this industry. The mob bribes politicians, and so does this drug industry.
On that note, we say many thanks to Dr. Faiez Kirsten speaking to me this morning about the history of the pharmaceutical industry. And don't forget to tune in next week, Thursday, inshallah, and catch some more of the pharmaceutical industries as we unpack that, inshallah. Stay tuned to Radio 786 with 2 minutes to 10 o'clock. We'll have a short break and then the news at 10.